Let's bring in my panel to discuss further. And joining me now is Gadi Adelman, a counterterrorism expert and advisor. Also with me here in studio is Middle East analyst Thane Rosenbaum. Thane, let's start with you. The IDF bracing for unprecedented riots in terms of the sheer number of people expected to arrive. Put this into context for us, given we have the Israeli elections happening on April 9th. Israel has recently been under attack from rockets from Gaza, landing in central Israel, 2 attacks over the course of 10 days. And now we have the 1-year anniversary of the so-called March of Return. How volatile is the situation tomorrow?
Unhappy birthday, March of Return, Michelle. I mean, it is fully a year. Remember, this isn't called March of the End the Blockade. It's not called March for providing more economic assistance. It has a specific purpose, March for the return to Greater Israel, breach the fence, infiltrate Israel, kill civilians. The problem is that both leaderships of both Hamas and Islamic Jihad and Israel, they all benefit in a way from this. Netanyahu has an election coming up. There was rocket attacks earlier in this week, as you pointed out, and he wants to show ongoing strength in his response to Hamas. And of course, Hamas, you know, they're not interested in infrastructure or leadership. They're very good at galvanizing support against Israel. And this is going to be one big parade of potential terror.
Thane, we'll explore the political implications with regards to Netanyahu and the elections a little bit later on. But I do want to focus on the situation that the IDF is bracing for tomorrow, Gadi. We know that Hamas has reportedly paid for wireless networks to be set up to allow the demonstrators to broadcast what's going on social media. They've declared the day a national strike, so no one can go to work even if they wanted to. They're busing in tens of thousands of rioters. At the same time, we just heard from our reporter, Emily Rose, that Islamic Jihad and Hamas are both promising that these will be peaceful demonstrations. What do you think the Hamas agenda is here?
I don't think you can put the word peaceful in anything in context with Gaza. You know, they're taking 38 different locations and they're busing thousands of people to 5 different locations across the border fence. You cannot have the same individuals that Hamas has been saying we are going into Israel and we will cut out their hearts week after week after week, year after year, and expect this to be nonviolent. It's not going to happen.
Gadi, staying with you, the IDF has extremely strict rules of engagement. What are the challenges here for the Israeli soldiers on the border?
You know, unfortunately, I really don't think that there aren't going to be casualties and deaths tomorrow. And that's the unfortunate part. Israel has made it very clear to the Palestinians to stay at least 300 meters, which is a little over 300 yards, from the fence. And both Hamas and the Islamic Jihad have stated that they're going to adhere to that. It only takes one individual. Personally, I don't think they're going to adhere to it, but it only takes one individual to get close enough to that fence to where the Israeli snipers are thinking that he's trying to get through the fence or come over onto the Israeli side, and you are going to have deaths. So I don't think at this time tomorrow we're going to be discussing how wonderful it was a peaceful protest.
Thane, I see you nodding in agreement because this is the big challenge for Israel. It has to try and minimize casualties because the international world is watching. As we just mentioned, Hamas wants to try and get as much of this broadcast on social media as possible, expanding the wireless network in the area. So how does the IDF tackle this?
Well, Hamas is hoping for dead Palestinians. I mean, this is the dilemma that Israel faces, the moral and legal dilemma. This is what's called asymmetric warfare. The terrorists are fighting or creating terror right beside innocent civilians. They're all standing next to each other. And this is something that's happened in the 3 earlier Gazan wars. This is the moral dilemma, and the Israelis really have no answer to this other than to say that no country in the world would be able to tolerate mass groups of people trying to breach the fence and trying to infiltrate their country. The problem is that Hamas fighters are indistinguishable from Gazans, And that's why, as Gadi said, it's very unlikely. And by the way, this is not the first time Islamic Jihad or Hamas said this is a peaceful demonstration. They always say it's a peaceful demonstration, but there's always people who are flying incendiary kites or throwing Molotov cocktails or sending tires that are flaming toward the fence or attempting to breach the fence. And when that happens, Israel has a legal obligation to respond, and someone's going to get shot who may not have actually thrown a Molotov cocktail.
All right, we will continue this conversation right after the break, and we'll also get into the president's threats to Russia in Venezuela. Gadi Adelman is a counterterrorism expert and advisor. Thane Rosenbaum, a Middle East analyst. Thane, the frustrations for many Israelis here is that Hamas is really dictating the terms of what's going on. Hamas attacks, Israel retaliates with its foot in the brake, doesn't really go anywhere near unleashing its full military might. Then Hamas asks for a ceasefire, Israel agrees until Hamas breaks the ceasefire. And this is frustrating to Israelis. Now, you said before we went to break that you think this plays to Netanyahu's advantage ahead of the election. Surely this puts Netanyahu even under more pressure to take some kind of major decisive action.
Except that he has been characterizing the Blue and White Party as the party that leads to Palestinian statehood. They are the party in his mind that leads to more terror and more violence. So the more that he shows the Israelis that the violence is not going away and he is steadfast as a strong military leader.
But there's also frustration with him, Thane, with how he's handling the violence, that the cycle is never ending. Doesn't that put more pressure on him to do something more definitive, more decisive?
Remember at the end of the last Gazan war in 2014, many Israelis were very critical that they didn't take out all the rockets and all the tunnels. At some point, they have to stop because global condemnation against the Israelis becomes unbearable, untenable politically. This story repeats itself and never has an ending. This is the strategy that Hamas uses. It's the only kind of governmental strategy they have. They have no other interest other than galvanizing their people to terrorize the Israelis. And Netanyahu it's ironic that he's running against a former military chief of staff.
Well, his former military chief of staff, they work together.
So it's not as if he's running against some soft lefty, but in this odd election, only Israeli politics could it possibly be that Netanyahu is claiming to be the stronger military leader.
Gadi, what kind of response does Netanyahu need to deliver here? He said today that all Israelis should know, and I quote, that if there's a comprehensive campaign required, that Israel will enter in a strong and safe way after they've exhausted all the other possibilities. Gadi, what are the possibilities that need to be exhausted here?
Well, you're asking the wrong person, because I've been saying take off the gloves since prior to 2014 and then the last war. Netanyahu is between a rock and a hard place, and I've used that line before here on your show, exactly for the reasons that Thane just characterized. He needs to show the Israelis, given the situation on the ground, politics aside, he needs to show that he is strong enough to keep those that live in the Gaza envelope in the southern part of Israel safe. But by the same token, he does not want to go into a situation where there's boots on the ground because of the rest of the world screaming about Israel using an unfair advantage, using overwhelming force. War is war. And there was never a time, except with Israel, where the world will start to scream, you're using too much might, you're using too much force. Israel needs to go in and decimate Hamas once and for all the reasons Thane just mentioned. This
Gadi,
is a
even that
tit-for-tat
means civilian
every single
casualties?
time.
Gadi, that will inevitably mean civilian casualties. Hamas, Islamic Jihad, as we know, they use civilians as human shields.
Absolutely.
This decimation would result in a tremendous amount of civilian casualties. You advocate for that?
I'm not advocating for civilian casualties. And Israel is very good, as we have seen in the past, of blowing up Hamas buildings when no one is inside and using pinpoint surgical strikes.
What's the point then, Gadi? Gadi, what is the point if nobody's inside? What is the point if the cycle continues? Hamas knows it's coming. They evacuate. The leadership moves somewhere safe. Israel blows up the buildings and then they get rebuilt, and here we go again.
Yes, except for this time, what needs to be done, what should have been done in the past, is after they decimate all of their buildings and they're underground, that's when Israel should go in. Yes, there will be civilian casualties, but a lot less. And they need to bring out the leadership of Hamas. They have to cut off the head of the snake, or this is never going to end.
Gadi, thank you. Appreciate your analysis as always. Gadi Adelman, Thane Rosenbaum, thank you both for your time tonight. A conversation that unfortunately we will be continuing.
Thank you, Michelle.